Well, I'm glad she didn't tell all the stories that she could tell. Yeah, I am. And as we saw earlier, I'm so sorry for those that went before on the video. Because of those kinds of situations, I bring visual aids, but they're low tech, and they don't require anything that can break. So, one of the things I want to tell you about is bring you up to speed on where the state budget is. And it's an honor to be here with Carol Springer because Carol preceded me as the state senator from Legislative District 1. And when I got to the Senate and tried to fill her shoes, I heard many a story how she had really worked hard to get the budget into balance. And I tried to carry on that tradition. And then within a few years later, we had some other things happen that I want to show you what's happened and where things are right now. Now, the state budget is one of the most important things that the legislature and the governor have to do each year. And we've had some tough times in Arizona. In fact, at one point in about 2010, Arizona had the second worst budget situation of all the states. Only California was worse at about a 32% shortage. We were 31.5%. But I want to bring you right up to speed as to where things are so that you'll understand some of the challenges that the legislature tried to add to the board here to come up with a 13 budget. Okay, when you're building the budget, and I think I've done the Kleenex boxes for this group one time, and that kind of shows you where the money goes, but this will kind of give you a real quick summary of where the budget's at, and then I'll talk about a special project that we're working on at the Secretary's office, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers, and we can talk about the governor's race next year, and we can talk about all kinds of things. Okay, I started talking about the budget starting in 2007 because that was the last, other than when Carol was there, that was the last year that it's been balanced until just recently, and I'll bring you right up to speed. But back in 2007, the general fund budget, we were spending about $9.5 billion. Now, where does the money go? The Kleenex boxes, if you could remember that, about almost half goes to K-12 education. About 10% goes to higher education, the universities and community colleges. There's about 10% that goes to the prison and court system, some state law enforcement functions. About 25% goes to health and welfare, access and all kinds of programs to help people with health care and welfare issues. And everything else combined is about 5% or less. But in 2007, we were spending $9.5 billion, and we had $9.5 billion coming in. And we had worked very hard, kind of like Carol had during her time, to get that in balance, because my years as president of the Senate were the first 4 years of Janet Napolitano as governor. And she never sent over a balanced budget. In fact, the year that we approved spending at 9.5, when 9.5 was coming in, her initial budget that she sent over was at $10.4 billion in spending. But we held the line and said, no, we're going to live within our means. And even, in fact, in 05 and 06, because the economy was healthy and we'd collected more than we spent, we had about $1.1 billion that we had saved in the rainy day fund. So things were in pretty good shape in 2007. Then they sent a few of us home because of term limits right here. And the next legislature started working the budgets with Napolitano. And unfortunately, they increased the spending to about $10.5 billion in 2008, even though the recession was beginning to kick in and the revenue was dropping to about $9 billion. So they had a $1.5 billion shortfall in 2008. They made up for that $1.5 billion by using almost all of the money that we had saved up in the rainy day fund. They used about $900 million of the $1.1 billion that we had on hand. They started doing some accounting tricks and gimmicks. One of them was to delay the payments out to all of the school districts around the state. The state counts its money beginning July 1st and ends on June the 30th. It also uses a cash accounting system. which means that it only recognizes an expense that actually writes the check that month or that year. Well, to make the budget look more balanced in 08 than it really was, the payment that they send out to the school districts on June the 15th, instead of sending it out when it was owed to the schools, they waited 16 days and sent it out on July the 1st. Well, July the 1st is in the next budget year. So it looks like they didn't have a June payment this year. And now how many do they have next year? Now they've got 13 payments in next year, but on paper it looks like we didn't have a June payment this year, and it makes the budget look a little more balanced than it really is. Then they started doing fund sweeps, or transfers in from all the different funds around state government that are supposed to be collected and spent on the things that are supposed to be collected and spent on. And instead of doing that, they transferred $300 million from all of those little funds over to the general fund to make the general fund look like it was balanced. And that got them through 2008. In 2009, before Governor Napolitano left, she increased the spending to a little over $11 billion. 11.1, even though her own Office of Management Budget, or it's called OSPB, Strategic Planning and Budgeting, admitted at the beginning of the year that the very best they could project the revenue might come in at was $8 billion, and they set the spending at 11. They realized pretty quickly that they couldn't sustain 11. They cut it back to about 10.7, which is still higher than the year before. But when Governor Brewer became the governor, he said we can't spend even 10.7 when only 8's coming in. Cut the spending to about 10, but the recession was worse than feared. The revenue didn't drop to 8, it dropped to $7 billion. So we had a $3 billion shortage in 2009. They used the last $200 million from the rainy day funds. They did another month where they didn't send the payment out to the schools on time. So back here they delayed the June 15th payment into July of the next year. This year they delayed the May and the June payment into July of the next year. These are the kind of things that you'd go to jail for if you tried to do this in your business. They swept or transferred about $800 million out of all the little funds around state government, and some of the big ones, like the highway user revenue funds that goes to maintain the highways. They started borrowing money, borrowed about $600 million. Most of that came from mortgaging a bunch of school buildings around the state that had no debt on them, all of which money, about $525 million from that loan alone. All got spent this year, even though we're now paying off the loans on all those school buildings for the next 20 years or so. And they started using large sums of the federal stimulus money that the Obama administration came up with to help the states, even though they were borrowing most of that from China or printing it, I don't know. Anyway, 2010 they cut the spending from $10 billion to $9.5 billion. Very hard to cut spending at government levels. But the recession continued to drag on. The revenue dropped from 7 to 6.5. So they had another year of a $3 billion shortage. They were all out of rainy day and cash reserve money. They delayed another payment to all the schools around the state, and now even some of the universities, colleges. They swept another $400 million from all the little funds around the government. They borrowed $1,000 billion. Most of that, $735 million, came from mortgages, from selling the state capitol complex to a real estate investment group that then rents it back to the state, so we pay rent for the capitol buildings. And then they used about $1,500 million, about $1.5 billion of the federal stimulus money to get through the 2010 budget. In 2011, they cut the spending to about $9 billion, from 9.5 the year before. Fortunately, the revenue kind of stabilized. The recession kind of bottomed out. The revenue didn't drop any further. And that's when they went to the voters to see if the voters would increase the sales tax by 1 cent, 1% per dollar for 3 years. The voters said they would do that temporarily. That extra 1% brings in about $1 billion a year. So the revenue came back a little bit to about $7.5 billion. We're still spending $9. So we got a $1.5 billion shortage. was no reserve monies left. They didn't do any more of the delayed payments. They swept $300 million more. They borrowed $400 million more. Most of that came from a loan they got from some banks, and they pledged the next 10 years of all the lottery ticket sales, so they kind of mortgaged the lottery. And they used about $900 million of the federal stimulus money to get through that last year in 11. In 2012, they cut the spending to $8.3 billion. Now, why did they pick 8.3? Two reasons. First reason was that with the extra 1 cent sales tax in place and the economy starting to grow a little bit again, the original projections were that the revenue was going to come in at about 8.3, so they thought, okay, we're back into balance. But probably the more important reason was that the federal stimulus money had some strings attached to that law, and one of the strings said, if a state wants to receive their federal stimulus money, as we still were kind of at the time, we were getting the last part of this money, if you want to receive your full share of the federal stimulus money, a state cannot cut its spending below what it was spending back in 2006 before the problem happened. And if we had a 2006 column, that was the spending level in the general fund in 2006. So that was one of the main reasons why they picked that as the spending level for 2012, so that they could get the final few $100 million of payments from the federal program. So at least we're kind of in balance. In fact, the revenue didn't come in at $8.3 billion, it came in at $8.6 billion, which gave rise to a huge argument at the Capitol of what to do with all the extra money. I'm serious. For 45 days. With all due respect, the Democrat caucuses in the House and the Senate unanimously signed a letter, sent it to Governor Brewer, saying any revenue that comes in above the 8.3, anything that comes in above that should go to increase the spending dollar for dollar as soon as possible. There were other groups that said, no, we need to start rebuilding the rainy day fund that we had wiped out. Other groups, including me, said we need to start repaying some of the money that we borrowed, because every time we pay back some of those loans, we save some interest or rent or principal payments that we're making up in here. Other groups said, no, let's pay back some of the money that we swept from some of the other state agencies. Other groups said we got to catch up on those payments that we're behind to the schools with, and 5 or 6 different ideas on what to do with all the money, but they argued for a month and a half on what to do with $300 extra million. But at least we're back in balance. We're spending less than we're collecting, but for the 4 years previous, the budget was out of balance 1.5, 3, 3, and 1 for a total of about $9 billion. And how did we get through that period of time? Well, we used about $1 billion that we had in the rainy day fund. We delayed payments to the schools and some other state agencies for a little over $1 billion. We swept about $2 billion from all the little programs that are supposed to use their money for other things. We borrowed about $2 billion, and we used about $3 billion of the federal stimulus money. For 2013, to bring you right up to speed, we're a few months from finishing the budget, June 30th. The spending level is almost 8.7, somewhere between 8.6, 8.7 billion. The economy has still continued to grow a little bit. We're collecting 9.1 billion. So things are good, except that this is the 3rd year of the extra 1 cent sales tax that expires at the end of May. So the May sales taxes are collected and paid in June. Those will come in and finish up this year. But on July the 1st, that $9.1 billion of revenue, when the 1 cent goes away, turns into 8.1. We're already at almost $7 billion in spending. The governor sent over a suggested budget for the 14 of $9 billion spending. Now they did save up they put $450 million from the excess revenue that we've collected the last year and a half or so. They've put about $450 million back into the rainy day fund, and they've got about $400 million of cash balances on hand that haven't been spent. So if this turns to 8.1, maybe if the economy continues to grow a little bit, that'll be 8.3 3 or 4. But if they spend anywhere close to the 9, they're going to barely be able to get through 14 with those monies they've saved these years. And then the kicker becomes 15. Because in 2015, Obamacare fully was implemented. And in order to keep the cost of the federal government for Obamacare as low as possible, which is still not low, that law shifts more expenses to the state. And Arizona, the effect on Arizona alone is estimated to be somewhere between $600 and $800 million a year. If all of the shifts that are in the Obamacare legislation require Arizona to pay that much more because the feds are sending us that much less. So 14 is going to be tight because the 1 cent goes away. I think they've got enough reserves to get through 14. Then the trick becomes, how do you get through 15 if the federal government shifts more expense to our side? And that's the state budget. That's where we're at. Any questions? Lucy?
Yeah, Ken, I'm wondering if the state capital was ever purchased back.
Was the state capital ever purchased back? The answer is no. That has not been purchased back yet. And in fact, when they did the deal, the people that bought it and are renting it to us have a guaranteed 10-year program. So even if we paid it back a little early, it might not save the state too much. But some of the other borrowing that we did, if we paid that off, we could save interest there.
Can you talk about the state exchanges, the insurance for Obamacare?
I don't deal with those much, so I will talk about the expansion. What is all of this expanding Medicaid thing? Why is the governor recommended doing that when about 6 months ago she said there's no way in the world we're going to expand Medicaid? Medicaid is divided up into different populations of people, children and this and that and whatever, and one of them is childless adults. And when the state got into its financial mess a few years ago, it kind of cut off any more people being added to that program. So there's been a waiting list that's been building over the last few years. And the federal government's trying to get the states to add more and more people onto any available program they can try to talk us into putting people on. But Arizona's been resisting adding people to that last group. We're doing everything that everybody else is in the other states for the other ones, but we've kind of been saying, no, we're not going to expand this last group. Well, most of the federal money that comes to the states on a matching deal, they match it $2 of theirs for $1 of ours. But as an incentive to try to force or coerce the states into taking money for this expansion, they came up with a 10-to-1 match. And then the hospitals got together, many of them around the state, and said, we'll actually create a tax within our own hospital systems to raise the $1 so that the state doesn't even have to pay the $1. We'll provide them the $1. And how could we turn down $10? And sure enough, now the governor's saying we'll expand the population for that group with $10 from the feds and $1 from the hospital. The kicker is the federal government can't afford to pay what it's paying for already. So even though it promises to give us $10 for $1 on this group of people, what happens when they hopefully very soon come to the realization that they can't afford what they're doing already, let alone adding more to that burden? And will they start to, is a 10-to-1 match this year going to be 9-to-2 the next year or 8-to-3 the next year? So they're trying to figure out whether to take the money at all or to try to build in some trigger so that if the federal government goes below a certain level, that everything's off. But if you've put 40 or 50,000 people that have been on that waiting list on the program, because the federal government's matching you 10-to-1, and then they cut that to 50-50 or whatever they might cut that to in a couple of years, it can be very hard to throw those people off the program. Susan? Is there anything on the books to attract businesses to Arizona? The governor's been working very hard in that area. She kind of eliminated the Department of Commerce, which was a state agency, and created a new Arizona Commerce Authority to bring in private business men and women to help come up with ways of trying to attract. I really think that this is the answer to solving our problems going forward. Is we've got to get our economy moving better than it is now. And even with what she's done, I think we need to be thinking and working the hardest of anything we work on right now on that issue. How do we make Arizona more attractive to companies that are leaving other states because they might be raising taxes in those states or whatever? I was speaking about a year ago on a program with the director of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. It's a group that all the cities in the Maricopa County area kind of, they created one economic development office that they all pay into instead of each city having their own economic development office. So it's a pretty good idea. They work on trying to attract companies to Arizona, and the guy that spoke just before I spoke said they had been tracking 300 companies that left California in the previous 12 months. Of the 300 companies they knew that left California, any guess on how many came to Arizona? One of the 300. They're going to Texas, they're going to North Carolina, Florida, Wyoming, Nevada. Interestingly enough, they're going to a lot of states that don't have an income tax. But anyway, we're never going to get 300 out of 300 companies that decide to leave California to end up in Arizona, but we ought to be getting 60 or 70 or 80, not one.
A critical factor, though, in attracting businesses and retaining them, of course, are strong schools.
Correct.
So, how can we elevate that portion to
How
attract
can we-
and retain businesses?
Yeah, I think it's a great point from our chair of the school board. I think the three things that really make a difference in economic development is your state's tax policy, its regulatory policy, and the perception or the actual quality of its education system. Now, I think Arizona suffers, I think we have a better education system than we allow the media to report that we have. And one of the things that I think we should do is fight back at a lot of the reports that try to say that Arizona is last or near last in education. Because usually the entities that are supposedly reporting that are making that claim based on where they say Arizona fits in the amount of money we spend per student. Well, I don't think we're 49th out of 50 in spending in the first place. But we shouldn't be focused on how much money we're spending per student. We should be focused on what's the academic performance of our students. And so I think we need to make sure that whenever we talk about education in Arizona, or have education in Arizona mentioned on a national or international scale, we need to focus on the fact that our students are I think, somewhere around the middle of the pack of the 50 states. We're not 49. Now we do need to, when possible, make sure that they have enough resources. If we get the economy growing and get people off of access, working in jobs, paying taxes instead of getting benefits, then I think that helps to raise the whole budget sensibilities of our state budget, of more of which dollars being used for education. But I think we need to be focused. To me, the most important thing in education is a good teacher in the classroom.
But attracting and retaining good teachers depends on the salary. We have
Right.
one of the lowest salary scales ever.
Of salary scales of Arizona, in Arizona's history, or?
In this local area, yes, that's my
Okay.
perception. But
That's not my understanding. My understanding is that the average, if you compare an average teacher salary in Arizona to the average salaries in Arizona, which take into account cost of living differences between some states and things like that, we're around the middle of the pack
we're
still.
not average here. We're below average.
Okay, then,
And retaining our best people is very challenging.
and that's where we need to focus on getting more money into the classroom. Now, whoa, we got so many. I'll do one more question, then I want to talk about the special little project, although I guess we have a little bit of time. Judy?
Going back to the expanding on Medicaid, is there anything that our state legislature and Senate can do to block the
Well,
governor's decision?
good question.
Because it is
On the
so
expanding of
irresponsible.
Medicaid, can the legislature block? Not only can they block, they have to agree to do what she's recommended they do in order for the expansion to occur. So That's not a decision that's granted unilaterally to the governor. The legislature will have to pass the enabling legislation to allow that expansion to occur. And so yes, they'll have to decide whether they now agree with her that we should do it, or as many of them had said earlier, they were not in support of doing it. But that will be one of the big negotiations this year. One more minute.
1% sales tax is going to go away.
Yeah.
You know, if they had presented that on the ballot as a review in 3 years again, it would have passed. But when they said permanent, then the
Question is,
we the voters should
Yeah.
have a right to review.
And she said that if the 1 cent sales tax had been made as another 3-year extension and then reviewed at the end of that, probably would have passed. It could very well have been, but a permanent increase did not.
One little thing, the legislature has canceled or not agreed to renew tax breaks for movie production companies coming into the state. This was a big deal. We had a lot of movie production companies coming in. Now nobody can get any work here in AFTA and SAG because the legislature will not give them a tax break. They're going to every other state and bypassing Arizona.
And those are the kinds of things that the legislature has to try to make a decision every year. Do you give special breaks to some industries to try to attract them in? Or do you try to focus on your kind of broader tax policy? You don't have a question, you have a comment.
I think years ago, my husband and I, and we have grandsons, voted for that.
For the 1 cent sales tax? Okay.
And my daughter, whose husband is born, and they both work, spends $50 a month to make sure their son's classroom has paper, glue, books, and they can't afford to for the taxes they have to pay.
And that's one of the challenges that we have, is trying to make sure that more of our total dollars that we, by the time you add the state dollars that we spend on K-12, the local dollars that go in from property tax and the federal dollars, that is one of the 2 largest sums of money that we spend on in Arizona. We spend about $10 billion a year on education, K-12. We spend about $10 billion a year in health and welfare. Those are by far the 2 biggest. The next biggest one is the university and community college system, all totaled about $4.5 billion. And there's no other part of the budget that's more than about $1 billion. So those are the big 3: K-12 education, health and welfare, and higher education. Now, I want to tell you real quick about a project that you may have heard me talk about, and that's the World War II Memorial at the Capitol. About almost 2 years ago, a gentleman that used to work at the House of Representatives when I was in the Senate came to my office, asked if I knew that the Navy, United States Navy, has 1 remaining gun barrel from the battleship Arizona. And I didn't know that, and his next question sucked me into it. He said, would you be willing to kind of take a lead on behalf of Arizona to see if we can get that gun barrel donated to our state? We can put it out maybe in the Capitol Mall there, next to the anchor and the masthead that we already have. That sounded like a great idea. So I called the Navy. That's an interesting prospect, by the way. I got a hold of the Department of Inactive Ships. There's a Department of Inactive Ships, and I got a hold of the director. And I said, this is Secretary of State Bennett from Arizona. We'd like to see if you would give or loan or something that last remaining gun barrel from the Arizona to our state. We'll put it out next to the anchor. And he says, oh, I'm not sure I want to do that. It's the last one we have from the Arizona. Even though I would later find out it's been sitting out in a grass field rusting for 50 years. He didn't want to give me the Arizona barrel because it was the last one they had. But he says, would you like one from the battleship Missouri? We have 7. So I said, well, this is Arizona calling, you know. Although, did you know that there are more governors of Arizona that were born in Missouri than any other state? I looked that up. Anyway. So I said, and then the thought occurred to me, I called him back, I said, how about this? How about we get both guns, both gun barrels? The one from the Arizona and one of the 7 that you have from the Missouri. And we'll put one of them out there as a symbol of the beginning of the war, the Arizona barrel, some Pearl Harbor. And we'll put the other one out as a symbol of the end of the war, because that's where we signed the surrender for the Japanese in Tokyo Harbor. And it was cute, but sad in a way. He says, ooh, you're thinking big now. He says, I like big thinking. I think I can get behind that project. So with all due respect to our federal government, if you ask for one something, the answer is no. But if you ask for 2, we kind of answers the question, why do we have a $16 trillion national debt? So anyway, we have now received both barrels. This is the Arizona barrel. If you can see it, you can come up afterwards. It's 54 feet long. I'll bet it's the length of this room this way. It shoots a 14-inch shell about 20 miles. And it weighs 70 tons. 140,000 pounds. The Missouri barrel, and it's this one right there that was on the ship when they came on and signed the surrender. It's gun barrel 387. It's 68 feet long. Not quite as long as this room, but 2/3 of it probably. Shoots a 16-inch shell, 24.5 miles, and weighs 140 tons. One barrel. And we are going to construct a new memorial out in the Wesley Bolin Memorial Plaza. The Arizona gun barrel will be on one side. We're restoring it right now. The Missouri barrel will be on the other side. And in between will be a new sculpture, or be it a metal structures that kind of look like the hull of a ship, maybe, as they bow out at the top. But on those 9 metal sculptures, steel structures, and we picked 9 because that's how many minutes it took the Arizona to go down. 9 minutes. On those 9 steel beams, we're going to have a 2-inch by 12-inch nameplate out of stainless steel with the name etched of each of the over 2,000 Arizonans that died in their service in World War II. And those, the gun barrels, plus this new sculpture, and the masthead that we already have from the Arizona. And this drawing is kind of depicted as though you were standing where the anchor from the Arizona is. All of those objects now become the official World War II memorial for the state of Arizona. When we started working on this project, we discovered that there's a memorial or a monument in Wesley Bolin Memorial Plaza for every U.S. war except World War II. Kind of like Washington. They just kind of, that generation was not into building itself any monuments or anything, and so the last one that we did in Washington was for World War II. I'm not here to raise money, but it does occur to me that we are not using any tax dollars on this project. We're raising private funds. I'd love the Republican women of Prescott to consider a donation. At $100, $125 or more, your name of your family or an organization goes on a small brick. There's a $250 brick, but there's a very nice one for $1,000. I heard you had $19,000 in it. You better give it to us before the legislature comes in and sweeps it. David?
How much is the whole project going to cost?
The whole project is about $500,000.
Is that all?
Yeah, we're not using any tax dollars. The largest cash contribution did come from the Arizona Department of Veteran Affairs, which has a private pot of money that they collect from individuals. It's not tax dollars. They helped us out with about $200,000. And it took that just to get the guns picked up and loaded onto trucks back in Virginia, and then taken to a train yard where they were loaded on trains, and then BNSF Railroad brought them all the way out for free. The other ones that are helping us, the other largest contribution so far is coming from the Rotary clubs around Arizona, have agreed to help us with $100,000. So they're helping there. Okay, who has an answer?
You have to tell us when you're elected governor.
I have to tell you before I leave, when I'm elected governor, what my first priority is going to be. Well, my first priority will be to get our economic engines going much better in Arizona than they are today. It's about balancing the, and that will play a large role in balancing the budget and giving us the resources that we need to go to the places that we need. One of the things we've got to do is get people jobs in this state and attract new companies to Arizona. We have 1.3 million people on access, our indigent health care. One out of five Arizonans is on access. Okay? And we've got to get the economic engines going.
How do we make a donation to that?
How do you make a donation to this? There is a website. It's up here, gunstosalutethefallen.com. And there's a section on there where you can, if you donate more than $125, you get to identify what you want your brick to read in memory of a family member or somebody that might have fought in World War II or something like that. So we do have a website where you can call our office and we'll help you help us. Okay, I'll take one or two and then I want to finish with a song.
I would like you to change the press that's coming out of Phoenix.
Change the press that's coming out of Phoenix.
Because there's so
Good
much
luck with that one.
negative coming out of the press.
You guys kind of do what
Okay.
you
We
want
want
to do.
them to be more
I will do my best.
I'll do my best. Yeah.
Since we don't own the capital anymore, do we get permission to put that in?
Well, we own the land, and we did get permission to put these guns in there. Yes?
One thing on the budget, sales tax versus income tax, about what's the ratio on that?
What's the ratio on the budget between sales and income tax? Very good question. Sales tax is the larger of the two. Sales tax brings in about 55 to 60%, and income tax brings in about 40 to 45%. Income tax is divided between individuals, which is the largest portion of the income tax, and then companies, corporations that pay a corporate income tax. A lot of people pay income tax if they have an S corporation or in whatever way the income flows out to the shareholders. But between sales and income, it's about 55 to 60 for sales, 40 to 45 for income tax. And most property tax, state receives almost no money from property tax. Most property tax goes to local governments, school districts and cities and counties and towns and community colleges and that. Any more questions, and then I'll sing a song.
I'm not a believer in games of chance, but I'm curious, you said that the lottery money for 10 years, could you reinstate what that's for, and what was it supposed to be used for?
Well, the lottery money goes to beneficiaries that were in the lottery legislation that the voters voted years ago. And the first so many dollars have to go to where the voters said they want. The excess dollars are supposed to go to education and a few things. For many years, the lottery didn't collect enough excess dollars to give much to education, but now most of the revenue above what they have to pay to the little beneficiaries that are part of the lottery law is basically committed to go to pay these loans that they got, a big loan that they got that one year. I will close with some comment, one quick comment about the governor's race next year. I appreciate some of you in the room today that are, including Val Stringer and let's see, Matt is back there in the back. There's some sheets going around. I have formed an exploratory for governor, an exploratory committee for the governor's race next year. I cannot officially announce until I'm in my last year as Secretary of State, which is January 1st. But with an exploratory, I can actually collect signatures to get my name on the ballot. I can collect contributions for the campaign account. I can only take up to $150. I'm not here asking for money, but I get asked all over, are you running for governor? Now, if I could turn the lights off and you could see my eyes winking, maybe you'd get the hint, but as of now, I can say that I'm exploring a run for governor next year. And if you see papers floating around where you can actually sign my petition to get my name on the ballot for the governor's race, that'd be appreciated. And then I'm going to sing a song. I'm glad that today was a lot about veterans. You'll be able to hear the guitar.
He's very good.
Can you hear that? Okay. This is a song entitled Morning Breaks on Arlington. And there were already references today about Arlington and, of course, our veterans and our military. This song was originally written as a poem by U.S. Senator Orrin Hatch, who lost a brother in World War II. One of his brothers was killed in World War II. So he wrote a poem entitled Morning Breaks on Arlington. His brother is buried at Arlington. And then years later, a friend of his put it to music, and it's called Morning Breaks on Arlington. And I offered as an honor to all of our veterans. How many veterans do we have in the room? All right. How many have a veteran in your immediate family or an active? Oh, look at that. All right. So it's really to all of you. So this is Morning Breaks on Arlington. Morning breaks on Arlington, warmed by rays of golden sun, and all who pause in homage there feel a soft hush in the air. Those who love their liberty bow their head and bend a knee, and from their hearts they breathe a silent prayer. Thank God for those who rest in honor there. The lush green grass at Arlington shimmers in the morning sun as pure white crosses seem to glow, sentinels in perfect rows. Everyone who lives and breathes wonders at the sight of these who gave to us a gift beyond compare. Thank God for those who rest in honor there. Home of the eternal flame of humble heroes without name, whose graves are guarded day and night, keeping memory burning bright. Those who gave so much for us bravely said, in God we trust. Now they are safe in His eternal care. Thank God for those who rest in honor there. Our nation's flag now takes the breeze, waving over all of these, and heaven smiles upon each silent one as morning softly breaks on Arlington.